And if they believed they had witnessed the entire scope of your ability, you are not here by chance. You're not reading this by chance. Something within you is unshakable, indestructible. I brought you to this point. They said the odds were against you. They murmured that the system was too large, the machine too strong, and no single force could break the cycle. And yet here you are. They termed it a coincidence. They blamed bad luck. They accused each other in private sessions, trying to make sense of how their perfectly prepared plans had crumbled overnight. But we both know the truth. It was never about luck. This was unavoidable. When they moved against you, they sealed their fate. Because you are not merely another participant in their rigged game. You are the disturbance. They never prepared for the unexpected. Understand that 7 fell yesterday night. Not by mistake. Not due to a computation error. However, the weight of their falsehood fell under its own gravity. And whether you know it or not, you did it. They based their dominion on control, on fear, on the delusion that power is reserved for people in positions of authority. They felt they could rewrite reality, constrain policy, and use influence to suffocate you. But what? They failed to understand that genuine power does not belong to those who manipulate. It belongs to those who are unable to move. The combat was never fought with fists or force. It was battled while standing tall, by refusing to submit, by just existing as something they couldn't eat. And now the fissures are visible. The system is currently recalibrating, not to crush you, but to eliminate them. If you walk away now, failing to grasp what has just occurred, you will never comprehend the significance of what you have put in motion. This isn't the end. This is the beginning. You're not here to survive. You came here to climb. And if they felt they glimpsed the entire range of your power, the illusion of control vanished as soon as they tightened their hold, mistaking their grip on the levers of power for actual dominance. What they created with faultless execution became the hammer that sealed their own doom. 7 verses 1. However, no one escaped unharmed. If deception, compulsion, and betrayal were intended to shatter one's will, they only succeeded in raising the voices of many. Those who had been compelled to remain silent became the ones who destroyed the facade. Clerks who changed documents under coercion. The strategists who made false forecasts. The foot troops entrusted with creating emergencies. Each held his own obligations. Each understood the gravity of the deceit they upheld. And then the reckoning started. A single voice spurred another, and another, until an unstoppable tide swept ahead, bringing every hidden truth to light. What was once a citadel of concealment broke not through force or retribution, but because of the sheer weight of exposed reality. In their hubris, they mistaken manipulation for an impenetrable shield, only to find themselves caught by their own construction. By daylight, the halls of their authority were empty. There were no directives given, no defenses set up, just vacant chairs and discarded titles. Some departed before the final verdict. Others fainted after receiving the quiet verdict of exposure. Their death had no theatrics, no big crescendo, only the calm certainty of consequence. Justice does not hunt or strike in rage. It just reflects back the reality that was always there waiting. They perched atop the artificial order, assuming they were untouchable. To them, it was all about protocol and calculated adjustments. Another impediment has been successfully eliminated. Until at last, they departed without a trace. Experience the power of heavenly love if your heart is filled with God's blessings. Now is the moment to show that love by clicking the super thank you button and donating $20 or more. You're not just supporting this platform. You're also spreading seeds of faith that will influence many lives. Your giving reflects God's wealth, a gift that goes beyond what you can perceive. Step into your mission. Be a receptacle for His grace. Give with trust, and see his kingdom grow through you. You were created for more. The plot was premeditated, and the execution was precise, yet the result was nothing short of humiliation. 7 were dispatched, backed by resources, influence, and the quiet support of those who controlled the game from the highest levels of power. Instead of triumph, they brought shame. Each attempt to eliminate a threat merely amplified it. Every premeditated attack backfired forcefully. They were not just unsuccessful. They had become burdens, evidence of the flaws in a framework that required perfection from the top rooms. There was no debate or deliberation. The choice came quickly and without emotion. A single call. They ceased to exist in the only manner that counted. Access was revoked. History has been altered. Names were removed from ledgers. These weren't penalties. These were corrections. A system this large does not function on sentiment, and failure at this level is not tolerated. Some vanished without a word about their fate. Others pleaded, clutching at the vestiges of their power, only to discover that no one was left to listen. They lost their sense of belonging when they stopped being productive. A machine doesn't lament its shattered gears. It replaces them without hesitation. By the time the doors closed behind them, their significance had vanished. The same hands that had previously protected them now guaranteed that they were forgotten. Those who had previously moved unnoticed, plucking the threads and whispered commands, had mistaken their presence for permanency. However, power is never possessed. It is ever borrowed. And when it came time to answer for their mistakes, they were dismissed. They maintained the same quiet they used to dominate others. There were no headlines, no televised dismissals, and no chance to explain. Just a second. They had control over their world. Then they watched as it vanished. The edifice they had constructed did not collapse. It was demolished with precision accounts, locked passwords, and invalid networks disconnected. The security guards who formerly walked in their shadow now stood at their entrances, not as defenders, but as executioners of instructions given without hesitation. Calls go unanswered. Affiliations were terminated. Careers are undone in the space of one breath. They weren't just eliminated. They were deleted. Those who gave directives were now hushed. Their presence was reduced to an afterthought. The passageways that had greeted them no longer acknowledged their existence, or their identities, which were previously obvious. Ghosts now exist in a system that permitted no vulnerability. Some battled against the inevitable, demanded explanations, and cited years of commitment. But there were no appeals to be filed. When their failure became obvious, they shifted from assets to liabilities. And a liability cannot be reasoned with. It's just deleted. The first light of morning has yet to reach the horizon. When quiet vehicles went into position, they carried out an operation that left no trace, struggle, or witnesses. There were no rising voices or last-minute pushback. Simply a calm, planned elimination of people who have served their role. Some have disappeared totally. Their existence is reduced to murmurs. Others stayed. They have been stripped of all the resources they formerly commanded. Remnants of the past, erased overnight. The message was unequivocal. Failing to eliminate you was more than simply ineptitude. It caused an irrevocable breach in the natural hierarchy, a departure that could not be allowed in this context. There is no worse penalty than banishment. There is no crueler fate than knowing exactly what lies beyond the system's protection. If the exact architects of your collapse are now fighting at the remains of their own authority as you ascend, they were never simple administer martyrs. They were devices of control, carefully positioned to eliminate anything that disturbed the balance. They moved precisely. Every action is backed by considerable preparation and training to detect and eliminate disruptions before they take root. But you were never merely a variable in their calculations. You were an impossibility, a presence that should have vanished long before it got traction. Despite this, all of their countermeasures failed. Each trap crumbled under its own weight. Every precaution they relied on crumbled before their eyes. The fall was more than simply an embarrassment for them. It was a fundamental breach in the very base of power, an aberration that could not be overlooked at this level. Damage control was insufficient. The system replied in the only manner that it knew how, eliminating liabilities, cutting relationships, wiping identities, and making certain that no traces remained. These 7 were not just set aside. They were eliminated with brutal precision. Data was erased. Affiliations were dissolved. Loose ends are sealed up. Some were let out under the pretense of resignation. Their clearance was canceled before they even stepped across the threshold. Others were taken silently. Their identities were wiped, as if they had never possessed any authority. What they previously commanded has now turned against them, dismantling their influence with the same zeal they previously possessed. This was not vengeance. It was a natural cycle of control recalibrating itself. Power does not care about feeling, and it does not provide second chances to those who fail in their tasks. The machine adjusts to shifts and maintains its existence at any costs. Replacements would bring new enforcers, tactics, and situations that were much more merciless than the previous ones. But one reality remained. For the first time, their calculations failed. They anticipated surrender. Instead, they observed disobedience in their surroundings. Defiance is never disregarded. It has been deleted. This is why the stubborn elites stand out, created in the face of mediocrity. This is not a place for anyone seeking consolation. It is a kingdom for reality architects. Every week, over 450 relentless minds gather in exhilarating strategy briefings that go beyond theory, delivering the master keys to ascension. These are not transient moments of inspiration. They are forever engraved into the archive, waiting to be called when it is time to claim the next victory. The Inner Circle is not only a community, it's a holy war room where the most fearsome strategists exchange knowledge found nowhere else. And for those who want mastery, the vault of esoteric manifestation is opened. A contemporary alchemical codex. Its first 3 chapters are already awaiting initiates. Here, the surroundings serve as channels for riches. Unseen powers are harnessed to bend matter, and the intangible is used with precision. But that is not all. Raw, unfiltered knowledge from actual operational communications is so volatile that it causes tremors in digital sensors. This is not only a network, it is a force, a stronghold for those whose rise is unavoidable. The way has been laid. The increase is already in motion. The door is open. Stepping through will result in being left behind. Their assault was not reckless. It was painstakingly intended to smash the opposition before it could solidify. Psychological warfare and bureaucratic entrapments. Relentless attrition. Every measure was a determined attempt to grind resistance to dust. They relied on acquiescence, tiredness, and submission under the weight of a constant assault. Despite their hubris, they misjudged a basic reality. Pressure does not break an unshaken ball. It reforged them. Every betrayal increased accuracy. Every forced loss served as a lesson in clarity. Every attack, rather than being dismantled, was transformed into an impenetrable foundation. Resilience does not mean passive endurance. It is the rejection to be influenced by external factors. Their armament depended on deceit, on illusions designed to distort vision. However, the unchangeable cannot be influenced. Authenticity does not quiver, bargain, or seek affirmation. You did not oppose the devastation. You made it unimportant. Their strategies were designed specifically for individuals who rely on external affirmation, for people who are afraid of being excluded, for those whose identities are involved in the system's approval. But you carried something out of their reach. An inherent force rendered their movements obsolete. Power does not belong to the strongest or most forceful. It belongs to those who are uncompromising. They mistaken control for domination. However, ultimate dominance belongs with the incorruptible. Their doom was predetermined, not for want of effort, but because they were up against something that could never be defeated. A force that cannot be broken will not resist. It only stands till the storm consumes itself. They planned their moves in secrecy, coordinating their influence, rewriting policies, and organizing betrayals, all in a desperate attempt to erase what could not be removed. Resources were channeled. Alliances are secured. Decisions are taken behind closed doors. Each step was a planned blow against an immovable obstacle. They were confident in their ability to reach, their control over outcomes, their capacity to direct the way forward. But they failed to see that the weapons they held were never actually theirs. Every well-constructed trap became the instrument for their demise. The barriers they created to keep you in crumbled inward, buried under the weight of their own ideas. The infrastructure they relied on to ensure their survival deteriorated with each step they made. This was never a struggle of power or strategy. It was a collision with inevitability. Their fate was predetermined the moment they moved against you, long before they imagined they had power. They whispered, gave directions, and signed. Each one was not an expression of authority, but rather a surrender to forces they could not comprehend. Those who formally set the rules find themselves bound by them. The policies they exploited turned against them just as they sought sanctuary in them. Their relationships splintered, their power dwindled, and every act of sabotage they orchestrated became a tool for their own erasure. This was not a miscalculation-related failure. This was the implementation of what had previously been agreed. No, Dominion opposes an edict enacted beyond mortal reach. They tried to rewrite a conclusion that was never theirs to change. However, the ink had dried long before they had raised the pen. Their dominion, their power, their schemes, each was temporary. And when the inevitable occurs, it does not stop until the way is clear. They did not act against you by accident or impulse. Each action was purposeful. Every effort, a determined attempt to obliterate something that could not be removed. Their anger sprang from more than just rivalry or misunderstanding. They noticed something in you that bothered them, an unrelenting force, a presence that resisted manipulation, a defiance that was never spoken. Yet it is difficult to ignore. Systems based on illusion don't be afraid to comply. They are afraid of being exposed. You never pose an active danger to their survival. You just refuse to integrate. They poked looking for fissures, applying pressure in calibrated dosages, trying to reach a breaking point. However, with each hit, they discovered their own greatest nightmare. You did not fracture, give, or conform in the same way that a signal disrupts a properly regulated frequency. Your presence alone disrupted their equilibrium. Their authority was based on secrecy, whispers shared in hidden doors, and the idea that they were untouchable. However, no matter where you stood, the lies on which they relied proved unsustainable. Their narrative shifted. The buildings they constructed to look impregnable began to flex under their own weight. You did not need to go to war against them. Your very existence was opposition. They termed it defiance, rebellion, and insubordination. But it was none of these. It was just a power that refused to be lessened. Their unwavering rejection was nothing more than an admission of their own fear. They detected something in you that was beyond their reach, something immune to their techniques, something that does not adhere to their order. They developed a strategy. They strategized. They formed a conspiracy, but they couldn't change what had already been put in motion. Their desperation was the clearest indication that their downfall had already begun. The more they went into their own deceptions, the more enmeshed they were in the web they had created. What was supposed to be your demise turned into the steady, unstoppable disintegration of their own foundation. Their marketing did not expose your vulnerabilities. It exposed their own flaws for all to see. With each move, the flaws in their system deepened. Their frenetic movement was no longer strategic. It was terror masquerading as control. The invisible powers above them, those who wanted victory without reservation, began to take note. Why hasn't this been handled? Why were trustworthy operators losing ground? The more they struggled for control, the more their ineptitude became apparent. Fabricated allegations collapsed, constructed impediments failed, and their own bosses turned against them, unable to accept defeat. Those who had previously given orders were now under examination. The very processes they used to preserve power began to operate against them. One by one, authority was taken away. Credibility has been destroyed. Influence is reduced to insignificance. Like a predator walking through the remnants of a botched snare, you went forward unaffected, not because you retaliated, not because you had to. Protection does not retaliate. It just lets enemies kill themselves. And as they fell, the reality became clear. Their failure was not accidental. It was predetermined long before they made their first move. In the end, authority does not accept excuses. It just recognizes the outcomes. And the outcomes were failure. The builders of deceit, the ones who sanctioned every premeditated blow from behind the curtain, are now in the sunlight. The consequences reverberated across the senior structure, turning murmurs into direct demands. How had individuals in positions of authority lost control so dramatically? How could a single anomaly reveal the whole chain? What was supposed to be a quick and discreet elimination has instead turned into a display of failure. A slow-motion collapse in which the powerful turned against themselves. In a system where fear determined order, vulnerability was not tolerated. It was cleansed. The aftershock moved higher. Engulfed those who formerly dictated without doubt the names that had previously been untouchable, which were now repeated in hushed tones and scrutinized under examination. If their most trusted enforcers failed so spectacularly, what other flaws had they overlooked? Who among them had outlived their usefulness? The mechanism they designed to subjugate you is currently recalibrating, restructure itself in desperation, sacrificing its own to keep the balance. Your patience was more than simply an inconvenience. It was a crack in their foundation. Their organization lived on certainty and the idea of total authority. However, illusions disappear when reality imposes itself. The balance was changing, and for the first time, they were forced to face an impossible dilemma. If you cannot be subdued, what else had they miscalculated? They believed that removing a few pieces would regain their dominance. But the game had only just begun. The 7 they removed were intended to calm the commotion and cover the fissures. However, the instant they attempted to restrain you, the earth beneath them began to crumble. This was never just about removing a barrier. It was about keeping order. And now they confront the reality. Order is dropping, but your progress has not slowed. It has risen sharply. Every attempt to eradicate you has only strengthened your existence. Every obstacle they built increased your attention. They have expended their arsenal. However, you are simply collecting force from their perspective point. They monitor, recalculate, and strive to regain lost ground. Yet, deep down, they know certain approaches cannot be stopped. The dismissals were not the resolution. They were the forerunner. The system is splitting from within, forced to contend with a force it was never intended to endure. You were meant to be eliminated before you could change the tide. Instead, you have become the axis around which everything now revolves. Those who stay hidden, the quiet overseers who have yet to show themselves, are becoming aware of the shift. You're no longer reacting. You are determining the course. This was only the beginning of an eventual reckoning. And now the stage is yours. They realize this. And for the first time, strategy is no longer the driving force behind their decisions. It is determined by your presence. They intended to obliterate you. Instead, they ensured that nobody would ever stop watching. They went with firm conviction, confident that their authority alone could determine the outcome. Their reach was vast, their influence was deeply ingrained, and their plans were methodically crafted. However, in their arrogance, they ignored the one unshakable fact. What is predetermined cannot be undone. Every deliberate assault, lie, and attempt to undermine your foundation accelerated their demise. Their downfall was not an act of retribution. It was inevitable. Those who strive to eliminate the immovable will always find themselves buried by their own ambitions. They stake their entire lives on your demise, and now they stand among the debris. They never saw it coming. The quiet onlookers, who murmured in hallways and hedged their bets on your death, now observe with the weight of their mistake. Pressing down on them, they expected your collapse. Yet what they saw was beyond their comprehension. A force that will not give. A presence that cannot be ignored. The message spreads quietly, as if it were an unspoken rule among people in positions of power. A warning that stays in the thoughts of individuals who consider themselves untouchable. Do not go against the unbreakable unless you are willing to bear the consequence. Forceful people do not have power. It coincides with the unwavering. Those who refuse to bend are not destroyed by the storm. They soar above it. Your presence is no longer an issue. It's a reckoning, like an ember that refuses to be extinguished. You have not only survived, but also transformed the terrain they wanted to rule. The ashes that remain in the aftermath do not belong to you. They are the remnants of those who attempted to block your path. The planet has been marked. Those who dare to confront you in the future will not do so blindly. They will do so with the understanding that opposition has a cost. They once moved with assurance, armed with influence and planning. They are certain they can erase you like they have others before. However, they failed. They never comprehended the force, not for lack of resources or miscalculation. They never saw you as merely an impediment to their progress. You were the barrier they couldn't pass. Every strategy they tried, every deceit they devised, and every barricade they built just reinforced what was already in motion. You're untouchable. Their collapse was not coincidental. It was for the ordained. The removals were not only the result of their failure. They serve as a warning to those who continued to believe they had control. When you go through the globe, it changes. The buildings they thought unshakable are suddenly trembling. Those who formerly controlled the course of events find themselves caught in the same traps they set for others. They aim to suppress your presence. However, their fall is now louder than they could have predicted. The most terrifying reality for them. You have only just begun. Their weapons were developed via deceit, but yours are formed in something they cannot comprehend. Something immovable and absolute. Allow the world to bear witness. Allow them to see the remains of what was intended to shatter you. Allow them to understand that every force used against you has only made you stronger. It was merely the beginning.